Hey everybody, welcome back. In the last video, we covered 3 different data types: strings, integers, and floats. In this tutorial, we're going to introduce lists. We're going to learn a few ways that we can use lists to store data, how indexing works, and a few methods and functions that can be used to manipulate those lists. So with all that being said, let's get right into it. To start out, I want to give you 2 examples of a list. I have 2 variables here, letters and numbers, each assigned to a different list. A list in Python is denoted with an opening and closing bracket. Anything within that list that is also separated by a comma is an element. If we take a look at my first example, we could tell that this is one element of the letters list. You could tell because we have our data type followed by a comma. So each of these would also be an element of the list. If we take a look at the numbers list below, this integer is also followed by a comma. So we know that is one element of the numbers list, and you can see that all of these are followed by a comma, so they would all be individual elements. I should also point out that a list can be composed of many different data types. They don't have to be one specific one, like I have just strings in this list and just integers in this list. I could also put, let's say, just a random integer in here, and this is totally valid. Now, just like any other data type, we can also print it out to the terminal. So if we use our print function and type in letters, the variable that's holding our list, and we can also type in the print function again and print out our numbers list, we can run this. And we'll see that we get both of our lists down here in the exact order that we defined them above. Printing out the entire list is cool and all, but what if you want to print out one individual element of a list? To do that, we have to use indexing. Indexing is just a number that represents the position of that element in the list. So computers, they start at 0, so 1 is basically 0, 2 is essentially 1. So if we take a look at this string right here, his index value would be 0. This integer 1 would have an index value of 1. The A would have an index value of 2, and so on. So if we wanted to print out G, for example, in our letters list, we would have to open and closing brackets after the letters variable, and in here you have to place the index of that element. So if we wanted to print out G, we would have to put in an index of 0. So if we run this, we should get G instead of the entire list. This is actually pretty cool because we no longer need a whole bunch of variables to store a giant range of data. So if we take a look at the numbers, there's 9 elements in this list. Originally, when we didn't have lists, we would need 9 different variables to store all this data, but now we just need one variable, and since we can reference each individual element within this list, it's pretty much the same thing as having 9 variables. So let's just print out a few more things just to kind of get the hang of it. I'm going to get rid of this integer value here just so it's more uniform. And let's print out something from the numbers list. Let's print out the number 6. So we got to figure out its integer value first. So we start at 0 and then go 1. So the 6 has an index value of 1. So we come down here and put in a 1 to print out the 6. Let's print out another one, a different letter from the letters list. Let's print out F. So we start at 0 again, 0, 1, 2, and then 3. So F has an index value of 3. So we then replace the 0 with a 3. And then let's run this and see if we get the F and 6. And in fact, we do get F and 6 printed out in the terminal. So an index value of 0 will give you the very first element in a list. An index value of 1 will give you the second element in a list. What would happen if you were to place in, let's say, a negative number? So if I were to come up to the letters list and place in a -1 here, and if I came down to the numbers list and placed in a -2, what do you think the output's going to be? So let's run this and actually see what's printed out in the terminal. You'll see that we get a C and a 2. So if we take a look at the letters list, we placed in a -1 for the index value, and we received the very last element in that list. We placed in a -2 for an index value in the numbers list, and we received the integer value of 2, or the second to last element in that list. So anytime that you use a negative index value, you're always going to be referencing from the very end of the list rather than the very beginning when you use a positive integer value. All right, so now we can print out individual elements of a list using positive or negative index values. We can also print out an entire list using the print function, but what if we want to print out a slice of a list? So if I wanted to print out G to D, for instance, how do we do that without stringing together a giant list of these? We could do this by using a simple syntax within the opening and closing brackets. You pick your starting index value, so G has an index value of 0, and we want to print all the way to D. We need to actually use the index value of F, because when we use this slicing technique, it prints up to but does not include the last index value. So F has an index value of 3, and when we run and print this, it's going to print G all the way to D. So if we take a look in the terminal, we do in fact get G to D. You also don't have to start from 0. You can just pick out a slice. So let's just say we wanted to print out D, F, and B. You could start within the middle of a list. You don't have to start from the index value of 0. So if we wanted to print out D, F, and B, we would find the index value of D, which is 2. So we're going to come over to the start and place in 2. Now you got to remember the very first index value is included within that slice. So if we wanted to print out B, we would actually have to include the index value of E, because this slicing syntax excludes the very last index value and only prints up to that index value. So we need an index value of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, an index value of 5 to print out this middle slice here. So if we run this, we'll see that we should get D, F, and B, and we do in fact get that in the terminal. All right, so let's say that you wanted to change an element in your list or add something to your list. We can do this a number of ways. One way we can change an element in your list is by doing this, typing out the variable name, and then setting the index value of the element that you want to change. So let's say we want to change the letter A here. Let's say we want to put in a 7. So we need the index value of this, which is 1. We place that in between the opening and closing brackets and set that equal to 7. Now, if we wanted to add something to the end of a list, we can use the append method. We can type in the variable name, so we'll add something to the numbers list, and then put .append. And then all we have to do is place in the value that we want to add into that list. The .append method only adds things to the end of a list. So if we want to place in a 0, we can just do this, and the .append method will place in a 0 at the end of this list. So let's print out our list here. We can get rid of these brackets, and then we'll print this out and see what we get in the terminal. And we'll see that we do get a 7 where the A was, and now we have a 0 at the end of our numbers list. The append method's great when you want to just throw a list together or just place in a new element within your list, and the order doesn't really matter. But what if you need to place an element in a specific spot in a list? Well, we can actually use the .insert method. The .insert method takes in 2 arguments, the index value where you want to place that new element, and then the value of that new element. So we could type in numbers because I want to place in a new value within the numbers list, and we'll use the insert method. And then let's say we want to place a new element in the spot of this 7. So we need to find its index value, so 0, 1, 2. So the 7 has an index value of 2. Come here, place in that index value, and the second argument, you need to separate them by commas. This is the actual value that you want to place into that list. So let's just call it new element. So we're going to place this new string in the spot of this 7, but what you have to know is it's not going to delete any value from this list. The only thing it's going to do is take this element, place it here where the 7 is, and shift everything else down. So let's run this and see what we actually get. So you can take a look, we get 8, 6, which we have here, and then we have our new element that we placed in using the .insert method, and then every other value got shifted down 1. So we can easily add in elements to a list, but we can also remove those elements. I'm going to show you 3 ways that we can remove an element from a list. To start off, I'm going to throw in a few print statements. This first block here shows us what the list looked like before we deleted the element, and the second block here is going to show us what the list looks like after we deleted the element, so we can compare the two in the terminal and actually make sure that it worked. The first way to delete an element from the list is typing in del for delete, and then all you have to do is reference the element that you want to delete. So I want to delete this string that we inserted here, and all I have to do is reference it in its list. So we inserted it within the numbers list, and it has an index value of 2. So if we run this, this should insert it and then also remove it a few lines later. So if we run this, we can make sure that it actually worked. And it does in fact work. We can see before removing the element, we have the string within the numbers list, and then a few lines later, we remove that string that we just inserted. Another way that we can remove an element from the list is by using the remove method. The remove method's a little unique because it actually takes in the value of the element rather than its index value. So we can type in numbers and then .remove. And then what we'd have to do is place in the value of the element rather than its index. So if we wanted to delete new element, we would have to type in new element exactly. And then it'll go through and remove it. Let's try something new like practical coding so we get a difference in the terminal. And then if we run this script again, we get practical coding, the string that we inserted, and then a few lines later, it again removed it from the list. The last way I'm going to show you how to delete an element from the list is by using the pop method. The pop method's a little unique because what it'll do is it'll grab the element value for you so you could store it in another variable, and then the pop method will go in and delete it from the list. So it gets removed from the list, but you also have that variable or the option to store that element in another variable. Alright, so let's first start off by deleting this line here because we're not going to use the remove method. We're going to use the pop method. And let's change our string to, I don't know, let's go squid. Squid seems good. And then we're going to type in numbers because that's the list that we inserted squid into. And then we're going to want to use the pop method. And you'll notice that the pop method actually uses the index rather than the actual value of the element. So we inserted the squid string on the second element of the numbers list, so we'll place in a 2 here. So what the pop method's going to do is it's going to go in, grab the value of that element, so squid, and then remove it. So what we have the option to do is type in the variable name. So we'll go removed equals numbers.pop2. So we'll have the squid value stored in the removed variable, and then it'll go through and actually remove the element. So we can actually print out, let's say, removed plus space was removed from the list. So if we run this, we'll see that we can scroll up a little bit. So before removing the element, we inserted squid with the insert method again. That was placed here. And then we removed the element using the pop method, but that pop method also stored the value of that element, so we could later print out squid, that value of the element here, was removed from the list. So I'm going to end the video here. We covered quite a bit of information in this video. In the next video, we're going to cover the rest of the functions that you typically use to manipulate lists. Also, if you take a look in the description, I'll have a list of all the functions we talked about in this video and a short little description about what they do. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.